Good evening. Let me begin by expressing sincere thanks to Dr. Bristol, head of the School of Education here at Cave Hill, and to her team in the Faculty of Humanities and Education for this invitation and for the work that you continue to do in shaping education in our region. It is always meaningful to standing in a space where ideas matter and where those ideas carry public responsibility. Tonight, I also pay homage to my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar and Rhoda George. In particular, my mother. My mother was and remains a freedom fighter in her own right. At a time when educational pathways in Dominica were sharply stratified, when common entrance functioned as a powerful sifting mechanism, she made a decision that was not only sacrificial, it was disruptive. She left the security and prestige of a high-ranking government position and founded the Nehemiah Comprehensive School. Not because it was convenient, not because it was popular, but because she refused to accept that a single examination at 11 years old should determine a child's intellectual destiny. She did not lobby quietly within the system. She built an alternative to it. For almost a decade before universal secondary education, that school created opportunity for children who had been filtered out by the logic of the system. The act was not administrative, it was institutionally defiant. And it taught me something that I did not fully understand at that time. Education systems are never neutral. They are designed. And what they are designed to do matters. I also salute my comrades across the Caribbean. Teachers, education officers, curriculum officers, school leaders, many of whom continue to work under serious constraints, often under-resourced, often overextended, yet deeply committed to the intellectual development of our children. Let me also be transparent. I have not always framed mathematics education as an equity issue. Early in my career, my focus was on curriculum design, pedagogical strategies, assessment framework, content knowledge for teaching, necessary work. But over time, something shifted. It shifted as I listened. I listened to adults who told me that mathematics closed doors for them, that because they did not pass CSEC mathematics, they could not enter certain programs, could not access certain professions, could not pursue certain dreams. I listened to teachers who felt blamed for outcomes shaped by factors far beyond their individual classrooms. I listened to students who by the age of 9 or 10 had already internalized the belief that they were not math people. And I began to see that mathematics in the Caribbean functions not only as a subject, but as a sorting mechanism, a gatekeeper, a determinant of mobility. That realization changed how I understand reform. The title of this lecture is Reform, Rhetoric, and Reality. When I use the word rhetoric, I am referring to the language of reform, the speeches, policy statements, strategy documents, project launches, and declarations of commitment that we produce across the region. Rhetoric is not inherently negative, but rhetoric becomes very hollow when it is not matched by architecture. When reform is spoken about more than it is structurally built. Across the Caribbean, we have seen persistent challenges in mathematics performance at primary transition points, at CSEC, and in readiness for advanced study. We know the data. We have analyzed the trends. We have convened task forces and launched initiatives. But if we are honest, we must admit something uncomfortable. The Caribbean does not suffer from a lack of effort in math education. It suffers from a lack of coherence. And this is what I want to explore this evening. If we are serious about improving math education in the Caribbean, we must build reform that is sustainable. Reform built around three interdependent pillars: capacity, coherence, and culture. Math education reform is not a simple technical problem. It is a complex, systemic challenge embedded in history, policy structures, teacher preparation, assessment regimes, public belief systems, and resource realities. It is a call for institutional courage because our children deserve more than projects. They deserve systems worthy of their potential. Let us ground ourselves in one reality that is both stark and persistent. Across the Caribbean, in 2024 and 2025, regional results show that roughly 40% of students who sat the CSEC mathematics examination achieved a passing grade. This means that approximately 60% did not. 6 out of every 10 young people who complete secondary school and sit this examination are not meeting the benchmark we have set in this subject. These are not abstract statistics. These are young people whose access to tertiary education, teacher training programs, technical institutes, scholarships, and certain professions depends on this subject. Mathematics is not optional in our systems. It is compulsory. It is high stakes, and it is consequential. When performance in a compulsory, high stakes subject remains persistently low across jurisdictions, across cohorts, across reform cycles, that is not an isolated classroom issue. It is a systems signal. And this pattern does not suddenly appear at the CSEC level. In multiple territories across the region, primary level data show that a significant proportion of students are not fully prepared for secondary school at the point of transition. In some context, only about 1/3 of students demonstrate readiness to access grade 7 mathematics comfortably. So by the time students arrive at CSEC, we are not witnessing a sudden collapse. We are seeing the accumulation of learning gaps over the years. We are seeing what happens when fragile foundations are stretched across increasingly abstract content. We are seeing cumulative misalignment. And yet, despite this evidence, our reform responses often remains episodic. We launch projects, we pilot interventions, we convene more task forces, we host workshops, we revise syllabi, we introduce new textbooks, we distribute devices. But if outcomes remain structurally similar 5 or 10 years later, we must ask a different question. Not why are students weak, but what is misaligned in the system. Let me name a few structural realities. First, teacher preparation and ongoing support. In many of our primary schools, mathematics is taught by dedicated generalist teachers who may not have had a deep, specialized preparation in mathematics content and pedagogy. That is not a criticism of the teacher. It is a structural design feature of our systems. At the secondary level, teachers often carry heavy teaching loads, large classes, examination pressure, and limited access to sustained, professional learning. In some jurisdictions, one mathematics education officer supports an entire island. In others, there may be one officer for all primary schools, numbering in the hundreds in some cases, and one for all secondary schools. Let us be honest. One person cannot single-handedly drive instructional transformation across dozens of schools. If we speak about reform, we must speak about capacity. Second, assessment regimes. Our systems remain heavily exam-driven. High-stake exams exert gravitational pull backward towards the system and through the system. Teachers feel pressure to cover content quickly, to prepare students for specific item types, to prioritize procedural fluency over conceptual depth. This is not because teachers lack insight. When the assessment drives practice without alignment to deep learning, we should not be surprised by shallow understanding. Third, resourcing and enabling conditions. Conceptual mathematics teaching requires manipulatives, visual models, technological tools, internet connectivity, collaborative planning, and sustained coaching support. Yet many classes around the region lack adequate materials. Internet connectivity is uneven. Access to digital platforms varies. Time for professional collaboration is constrained. And when we ask teachers to produce conceptual understanding without providing enabling conditions, we create tension between expectation and possibility. Fourth, belief systems. Across the Caribbean, there remains a powerful cultural narrative that some people are simply not math people. It is said casually. It is said in homes. It is said in staff rooms. It is said in jest, in joke, but it becomes internalized. Students absorb it early. Teachers sometimes inherit it in their own classroom and schooling experiences. It shapes identity. It shapes effort. It shapes expectation. When a system produces 60% non-pass rates, that narrative is reinforced. So the issue before us is indeed complex. It is historical, structural, cultural, political, and pedagogical. And complexity matters because when mathematics functions as a gatekeeper to opportunity, when it shapes access to jobs, programs, and mobility, persistent underachievement becomes more than a technical challenge. It becomes an equity issue. It becomes a question of justice. If we are to move beyond rhetoric, beyond declarations, and more projects, beyond cycles of enthusiasm followed by stagnation, then we must build systems that are coherent from early childhood through to secondary school. Complex systems require intentional architecture. The data are not simply telling us that students are struggling. The data are telling us that our systems require redesign. So what would reform look like if we took coherence seriously? If the problem is systemic, then the response must be systemic. Let me suggest a simple but demanding proposition. If we are serious about improving mathematics education in the Caribbean, we must build reform around 3 interdependent pillars: capacity, coherence, culture. These are not slogans. These are structural commitments. Let me take them one by one. First, capacity. When I speak of capacity, I do not speak of effort. Our teachers are already exerting an extraordinary amount of effort. Capacity refers to the professional knowledge, skills, leadership structures, and material resources required to teach mathematics well. It means teachers who understand mathematics conceptually, not just procedurally. It means teachers who are supported to develop mathematical knowledge for teaching over time and not in one-off workshops. It means instructional leaders, numeracy coordinators, head of departments, education officers who have the time, the training, and mandate to provide coaching and feedback. It means classrooms equipped, and again I repeat, with manipulatives, visual models, and appropriate technological tools. And it means that when we design professional development, we move beyond transmission models towards sustained practice-embedded learning. One workshop cannot undo years of fragile mathematical preparation. Capacity building requires structure. Without capacity, reform becomes aspiration. Coherence, secondly, is about alignment across grade levels, across policies, across assessment systems, across professional learning. Too often, our systems are fragmented. Curriculum reform occurs without simultaneous changes in teacher preparation. Assessment reforms occur without corresponding instructional shifts. Technologies introduced without pedagogical integration. Initiatives operate in parallel instead of in concert. Coherence asks a harder question. Do our early childhood numeracy goals align with our grade 6 expectations? Do our grade 6 expectations align with what CSEC assesses? Do our professional development initiatives align with the curriculum and assessment frameworks teachers are accountable to? When systems lack coherence, teachers experience reform as noise. When systems lack coherence, that is, teachers experience reform as noise. When systems are coherent, teachers experience reform as support. Coherence reduces friction. It makes good practice sustainable rather than just heroic. Third, culture. This may be the most difficult pillar. Culture refers to the beliefs, norms, expectations that shape how mathematics is experienced in our societies. Do we believe that mathematical ability is fixed or developed? Do we see teachers as implementers of policy or as intellectual professionals? Do we treat mathematics as a gatekeeping filter or as a human right? Culture shapes everything. If we maintain a public narrative that mathematics is inherently for the bright few, then even the best designed reforms will struggle. If teachers feel professionally diminished, micromanaged, or blamed, they will retreat into compliance rather than innovation. If education officers are tasked with island-wide transformation without adequate support, reform fatigue sets in. Changing culture requires language. What do I mean by that? Culture shifts when the language we use shifts. When we stop saying casually, some people are just not math people. When we stop describing mathematics as something to get through rather than something to understand. When we stop equating speed with intelligence. When we stop treating failure in mathematics as normal and inevitable. Language shapes expectation. Expectation shapes practice. Practice shapes outcomes. When our public discourse is deficit-oriented, that narrative becomes internalized by students, by teachers, by parents. Changing culture means deliberately using language that affirms that mathematical competence is developed, not inherited. It means speaking about teachers as professionals who require structured support, not as deliverers of syllabus content. It means speaking about mathematics as a form of reasoning and sense-making, not simply as examination performance. It means leaders, ministers, chief education officers consistently reinforcing a narrative that conceptual understanding matters, that collaboration matters, that sustained professional learning matters. This is because culture is not shaped by policy documents alone. It is changed by what leaders repeatedly say, what they reward, and what they model. If we want a culture of deep mathematical thinking, then the language of our systems must reflect that priority. Changing culture also requires leadership. It requires visible commitments that signal respect for the teachers as professionals, leadership that signals in words and in action that teachers are professionals whose expertise must be developed, trusted, and supported. Leadership that protects time for collaboration, that invests in coaching, that aligns policy with classroom reality. I repeat, that aligns policy with classroom reality. This is because culture shifts when leaders repeatedly name what matters, and culture shifts when teachers experience reform as support rather than surveillance. Changing culture also requires honesty. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about our education systems. It requires us to confront how our systems educationally have historically functioned. We inherited structures designed to sort, to rank, and to filter. Examinations were not originally designed to ensure that all succeed. In many jurisdictions, we have retained this mode of examination. They were designed to determine who progresses. If we do not acknowledge that history, we risk reproducing it, even unintentionally. So yes, we need capacity. Yes, we need coherence. But let us be clear about their relationship. Capacity without coherence produces isolated pockets of excellence. Heroic teachers succeeding despite the system. Coherence without capacity produces beautifully written policies that change very little in the classroom. Capacity and coherence without cultural shift produce technical compliance. Teachers doing what is required, but without deep transformation in how mathematics is experienced. But when these three pillars align, capacity, coherence, and culture, reform begins to move from rhetoric to reality. Let me begin to close where I began, with an act of institutional defiance. My mother did not wait for the system to become perfect. She did not wait for consensus. She did not wait for funding cycles to align. She saw children being filtered out, and she built differently. But here is the difference between her moment and ours. She was creating access where none existed. We are working within systems that already exist. Our task is not to build parallel institutions. Our task is to redesign the ones we have. And that work alone cannot rest on teachers alone. It cannot rest on one mathematics education officer per island. It cannot rest on curriculum documents alone. It must be shared. To the teachers in this room and across the region, your frustration is not irrational. When expectations are high and support is thin, frustration is a sign of professional conscience. But your work matters deeply. Every moment of conceptual clarity you create in a classroom disrupts the narrative that mathematics is only for the few. Every student who begins to see themselves as capable of reasoning mathematically represents a cultural shift. To education officers and curriculum leaders, the scale of your responsibility is immense. Often under-resourced, often invisible, but instructional leadership matters. Alignment matters. Consistency matters. The language you use in staff meetings, in circulars, in policy discussions, it matters. You are culture shapers. And to the policymakers, if mathematics is as consequential as we say, if it determines access to opportunity, then sustained investment in coherent reform is not optional. It is a development priority, not a project, not a pilot, not a line item that expires, but a long-term commitment to building professional capacity, aligning systems, and reshaping belief. We know reform is complex, but complexity demands design. It demands alignment. It demands courage. We must ensure that when we speak of reform, we are not only producing rhetoric, language of commitment, but constructing the structures that make commitments real. Capacity, coherence, culture. These are not abstract ideals. These are practical obligations. If we build capacity without coherence, we exhaust our teachers. If we design coherence without capacity, we frustrate them. If we ignore culture, we reproduce the very patterns we seek to change. But when these pillars align, something different becomes possible. A system in which fewer children internalize the belief that they are not math people. A system in which teachers experience professional growth rather than reform fatigue. A system in which mathematics functions not as a gatekeeper, but as a gateway. This is not utopian, it is achievable, but it requires intentional design. It requires institutional courage. And it requires that we move beyond reform as activity towards reform as architecture. The Caribbean does not lack talent. It does not lack commitment. It does not lack intellectual capacity. What we must strengthen is alignment. What we must sustain is coherence. What we must nurture is a culture that affirms that mathematical competence can be developed and that teachers deserve the structures to make that development possible. Our children deserve systems worthy of their potential, and we are capable of building them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. George. I think that you have done quite a bit to help us understand. There's so much going on in my head right now. that I don't know where to start, right? When we think about this work, I like the fact that you ended on reform as architecture, because immediately I begin to think about mathematical competency, not as a trait, but about mathematical competency as a practice. And if we think about mathematical competency as a practice, we can see how understanding the practice architectures and the practice landscape, so I'm using a different theoretical framework now, creates this set of enabling conditions that either constrain the arrival of a practice of mathematical competency as success and empowerment and transformation, or creates the constraints within a system that allows and repeats and entrenches mathematical competency as a 60% failure. So I would want to start there as a point of entry into the conversation that we want to have this afternoon. And colleagues, it is a conversation, because very rarely do we have the opportunity to, in a humanistic way, starting from the position of our own biographies and the ways in which our experiences and the experiences of those who are significant in our lives shape our understanding of the practices that we are called to reform, transform, and reproduce. It's rarer still to have a conversation like that when we talk about mathematics. So, Dr. George, thank you so much. First, as I open the floor for those in the room with us to engage with Dr. George, as well as those of us online. And we are monitoring the chat, colleagues, and we want to hear from you, for those of you online. So if you do wish to make an intervention, I would ask that you use your raise hand icon function so that we can invite you into the discussion. While we wait for those online to find their raise hand icon, maybe we can stop sharing so we can see the room, the virtual room. I would ask those of us in the room to make any interventions or engage with that. Go right ahead. Just introduce yourself to us, because you need to come to the mic though, a little bit. Or throw your voice so that the person's here will hear you. All right.
Yeah, I quickly tell you, this presentation needs to happen in front of 4 and 6 people. Like,
well, it's more than 6.
Well,
I
am very excited for that presentation.
Keep your teacher voice going though.
My first question is, how do we combat the personality?
We are not hearing.
We'll repeat the question. Go ahead. We'll repeat the question for you. Go ahead. Go ahead. Ask the question.
How do we combat personality components of building capacity?
Okay, so the question, colleagues, for those of you online, is how do we combat the personality component of capacity?
Thank you so much for your question, and thank you for your enthusiasm. That is an important question, because this continues to serve as a hindrance and a constraining factor. What I say is that the problem before us is too big for us to be constrained by personalities. When we think, as I have put forward in the presentations, the presentation, that the impact on, you're talking about millions of students over years, in terms of their trajectories for professions, for schooling, for their goals. When you think about the impact that mathematics has on that, to me, personality must fade. The scale of the problem is too big for us not to focus on what is important. Our children, as I ended, deserve They deserve our best. And we know mathematics is a compulsory subject. So it's a noose really around many children's necks for a long time. And I don't think there is space as we go forward for us to be hindered by something as, I would not want to use the word trivial, but many times we have to shrink for other bigger things to take place. And I think if we put in focus the importance of people, not our agendas, not our plans, not our personhood, etc., then it becomes clear what we ought to do and where the focus ought to be. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or comments in the room while we give persons online the opportunity? Go ahead.
Yes, I have one question, and this is your presentation, especially if you're strong. Culture, I think culture is an important factor in shaping how we perceive mathematics. Culture informing, culture influences, and culture impacts. I think the impact of culture we have towards mathematics is almost as we're going to default for us to say that math is hard, math is not something I want to do. I teach that, so I'm not going to get that from some students. So how do we combat a culture that is so deeply entrenched, deeply systemic, that is not supportive of embracing the thing we call math? How do we combat that? Get people to see math and appreciate math as something that we're capable of doing.
Dr. Marshall, thank you so much for that very important question. And as I prepared for this presentation and I bounced off ideas in my mind, I thought about how could we achieve this very, very, very difficult component. Because while somebody will not say that I can't read or write, I'm illiterate, it is the biggest joke in the room that I don't do math or I can't do math. I believe it begins with I believe in incremental and small wins. One child, one home, one school, one community. And I wrote a paper a few years ago related to the impact of parents. And there is now quite a move in terms of parental involvement. And I tend to disagree with how we are engaging parents. So we are asking parents to do projects and this and that they're incapable of doing. But my premise was, can we refine the conversations that we are having? Can we have discussions at the PTA level, 10 minutes to discuss our own narratives and our stories? Because for many people, mathematics has been traumatic. And if we do not stop to give space in the room for that and just jump over it to, we must all love math, then we are missing the point. In my presentation, I spoke about listening to stories. And I started there because listening changes you. It changes your perspective about things. And for many people who, even through tears, mention to me their experiences, it means that it's a deep-seated thing that we need to overcome. And it can't happen in a short time. We tend to love things that are a snap of a finger. Because our political cycles are 3 to 5 years, we don't understand what I'm talking about is a long game, 5 to 10 years at least, to start to see the change that we are talking about. So community initiatives, having, as I said, frank conversations and talking to parents about the importance of mathematics and how can you just support your child in a different way at home. Don't say this as much. Don't keep reinforcing it is hard, but we need to ensure that our students have good experiences with mathematics. From as early as grade 1, we would think the concepts are, I'm not going to use the word easy, but we can gain access to them. But many kids are not gaining access to those concepts. It is not fun. It is not easy. It is not any of those things. So when we start to teach in a way, to engage children in a way that they begin to see the mathematics as people like me, I see it and I talk passionately about it, then that will start to impact language. Experience will impact language. But if my experience is continual failure, continual negativity, to tell you, man, let's put on a bright face and do math, that's hypocrisy. And that's not what I'm perpetuating at all. So today I had, and I'm going to just stop here, a beautiful experience with one of my pre-service teachers. So in the middle of the day, I got a WhatsApp message, all emojis, caps. Dr. George, can you believe, because we have been doing patterns and generalization in our graduate class. We did it in class and it worked. I had fun, they had fun, and we learned. I did not, and she was ecstatic. And she said, I keep hearing you in my ears. I keep hearing you in my ears. Stop doing this rote thing. Do it in a certain way. And she said, I believe. And I'm getting more of those messages from my students. In the middle of the day, she teaches in a difficult school. And she said, Dr. George, it worked. We did it in class, in the microwave. We did it. We have been doing it collectively. And I said to my students to be brave. I said to them, be brave and try it in your own classrooms. And they have been trying, and the stories have been remarkable. And you only become a convert when you have those experiences. Not coming to my graduate class and me preaching about patterns and generalizations are great. But when you see the child's face lights up, they found Euler's formula without knowing Euler's formula. Oh my gosh. Because she had no idea about Euler. Neither does anybody probably in this room. And she said, Doc, we found a pattern. I did not know there was a pattern. And I said, was it Euler? She said, I have no idea who that is, but we found a pattern. And that is the kind of enthusiasm I want each teacher, each classroom that they encounter, for children to have a special and different relationship in that moment. Because once the kids get that level of excitement, when it becomes hard, they will push through. They will linger a little bit more. And that is my hope. That is my passion. That is my goal. I hope I've answered your question beyond just, sounding like I'm preaching, but because I really want to be practical about this in terms of its possibility. Thank you so much.
We do have a question from a colleague online. And the question is, I feel as if our regional mathematics curricula is loaded. Do all students need to access all of these concepts to become numerate citizens and for everyday life?
Excellent question. And if my students are in the room, they know my answer to that. You don't have to do everything in a curriculum for you to be competent. You don't have to do everything. You need to know the right things, because there are some key aspects, key topics that are foundational to other topics and foundational and a pathway to even other subject areas like physics and chemistry and technical drawing and carpentry, etc. So it is loaded. And my graduate teachers will smile because I keep saying to them, guys, you are change agents, you are disruptors of the system, and you don't do it in a way, and education officers don't come at me, don't do it in a way that is disrespectful, etc. But we have to keep pushing back. So for example, a teacher says to me, and I'm going to use my anecdotal stories as a pathway. As you notice, I started with my own experience. Miss, we were told to do all of number in, if it's 6 weeks or something like that. I said, it is impossible. Miss, I told them, I said, Dr. George said, don't say Dr. George said. I said it's impossible to do all of that content unless you do it in a very superficial way and the children will not benefit. I said, push back. The HOD won't, I said, push back. Gently, respectfully, and I bring in the theory. We talk about Piaget, we talk about Bruner, and I say push back gently. And people started to listen at the school level. It's not an easy thing, because you are targeted, and people think, oh, you're going to do this program at UE, and all of a sudden you come and you're trying to disrupt our little program. But we have to push back because we teach children and not the curriculum. Because if we actually taught children, we would stop, because the child has not understood. And we gallop along like as if, we are happy, we are covering our curriculum. But when you look at the mark sheet, they have failed. The unit test, 75% of them have failed. So who has succeeded in all of this 6 weeks of teaching? Who really has succeeded? So I know by the time you leave this presentation, for those of you in the mathematics sphere, you will, I hope, understand that we need to be disruptors, because we can't just continue sailing along and think things will change. Think about our colonial past. You think slavery just ended because everybody just sat and sang Kumbaya? No. This has been, Dr. Marshall, you mentioned a long-standing issue that's entrenched. That means it's not something that will be dug up. Think about a tree that has deep, deep, deep roots. Think about how you can, I don't know if you have a home and you're trying to get rid of that tree, and more you dig is more you see roots. That's what the mathematics culture issue is. And that's what we need to continue to disrupt and confront. I know I went beyond your question, but I hope it answered it.
So I'm going to take the mic off because we're being told by our persons in the audience, and hopefully I don't mash this up, that they can't hear the persons in the room. So Prof, you will come and meet me halfway. Resume. I'm only saying what she said.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Those of us who know Dr. George are very familiar. We know the passion that she exudes for what she does, and for teaching and for students and mathematics and mathematics education. So, having said that, one of the slides you showed toward the end of your presentation struck me: gatekeeper or gateway. So I'd like to ask, respectfully, in the capacity of devil's advocate, is it realistic or is it possible not to see or not to use mathematical competency as a gateway to, or gatekeeper to higher education, career opportunities, STEM fields certainly? How do we not see mathematics as a gatekeeper?
The questions are so interesting this evening. And Prof. Sweeney, it is really in line with a committee I'm now leading in Jamaica. We are revising and looking at the matriculation standards for teacher education. And I've been tasked with my committee members to look at what we ask students, what subjects they need to matriculate into teacher education. While of course, your question went beyond that, but I will start there. And our requirements at the moment are 5 subjects, including math and English. And as a team, we have been deliberating and asking ourselves, does everybody need the CSEC pass 1 to 3? We are having that very difficult discussion. And I'm not sure if many of you know that CTech from CXC is coming on board in 2027, where there's a modular approach to mathematics examination. So instead of a one-shot exam, students are able to sit 3 modules, and that stacks to become their competency. We are discussing when is math necessary, and I cannot say I have the full answer at the moment. What we do know from some analysis that we have done for certain fields, especially STEM, we need to ask for more than a grade 3. So we have realized that for certain specializations, we need to up instead of going down. And for some specializations, maybe we should say a different type of competency. A different type of competency, maybe more numeracy based, depending on what's needed. So mathematics is indeed a gatekeeper, even for basic employment as well. And what we have been discussing in our committee is, okay, how are employers going to view this modular thing? What are we going to say? Would module 1 be sufficient for certain types of work? Module 1 and 2 for certain types of work, etc. So this is an ongoing conversation, at least in Jamaica. And I'm having the privilege of actually leading. I do not have all of the answers. I started writing the report, and as I'm writing the report, more questions come to mind. How do we, and what do we use for matriculation in certain fields, etc.? That would be robust enough, rigorous enough, because you don't want to water down things. But neither do you need, vectors and matrices for certain levels of employment. And you can always go back to get those competencies if you need it. So let's say at 16 years of age, you said, I can't be bothered, I'm just doing module 1. The great thing is that as time goes and you develop as a human, let's say young people, they can decide, let me go back and get the full competency. So I think that's an ongoing discussion. I think if we are honest with ourselves, it's a difficult discussion because it has no easy answer. Because right now we do not have a replacement alternative exam, for example. So we'd have to create certain things. And I think as we continue to have these discussions, we realize that we need to be innovative and creative in what we are doing, because sometimes we sit on these committees and we basically recycle what has been done. When you think at the end of the exercise, you end up with something almost very similar to what you had before. But we are saying, let's dismantle some things, not everything, we keep what's great, but we need to be thinking from a different lens. So that's why I really love that question. How can we use mathematics? Some people need it for certain things, some people need more of it, some people need less of it. How do we do that kind of stratification? Yes. Yes. I hope I've answered your question. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, as we think about gateway versus gatekeeper, that we also need to change the way we construct gatekeeping. Because gatekeeping could also be a quality signifier. And it's related to the quality of competencies that you might need to go on living in a world that is worth living. So maybe part of the challenge that we're having is how we conceptualize notions of gatekeeping. Before I come back into the room, we do have another question online. And that question, thank you, Lois, for your very interesting and deeply thoughtful lecture. What are your thoughts on how we can leverage AI to support teacher competency for math education? And what resources do we need to lobby for in this regard in the region?
Excellent question. And it works out beautifully because in February, the Acting Math webinar series, Advancing Caribbean Teachers in Mathematics series that I am spearheading in the region, in February, we had a session called Use of AI Tools for Mathematics Teaching and Learning. By the way, the resource is available on YouTube. Just Google us. So we have started having those conversations, and I really appreciate the questions, the very well thought out questions that are being asked. And I think AI is a tool that we can leverage in a number of ways for lesson planning, for assessment, for even individual student study mode and helping students having one-on-one or individual assistance. So one of the things teachers always say, I don't have time to do one-on-one with children, to do small groups, etc. But in the session that we did last month with Dr. Andrew Hunt, my colleague from UE Five Islands campus, comrades in the field, shout out to Dr. Hunt, we saw that there was a particular bot that was able to take a child, a student, line by line, whatever their issue is, and basically almost tutor the child through a particular content concept. And we are seeing AI not just for the classroom teacher on a whole, but even for students to leverage for their own learning, because we want students to take control of their learning. I don't understand this. We see humans as our own source of knowledge. I do workshops, and you know what teachers say to me? But Doc, we were not taught. How you expect us to know? I say, how you mean, how I expect you to know? All the information that's outside in the world? So we want our students to be lifelong learners, to be independent learners, and AI is one of those powerful tools we can use. But it is important that we educate them, show them not just because they're using it for, when I say they, I mean our young people, our students, for many things, but we want to bring it in a way that they also use it and see it as relevant to their education. So I think this is an ongoing conversation because Dr. Bristol, you will correct me if I'm wrong, in education, we seem to be the last to adopt any form of innovation. Teachers are afraid. Teachers will tell you, I'm not doing anything techy, I'm not in that. And I say to teachers, how can you be not in that and you're teaching Gen Z and Gen Alpha? If a doctor says, let's say there's a new technique in heart transplants and you are a cardiologist and you go to your, prof, you can correct me, you go to your head cardiologist and say, I'm not in that. That is a no-no. But teachers conveniently often use this, and the level of autonomy teachers have to do what they feel like, even if it does not align with what is best for the child. And I will just stick in the conceptual understanding. We bypass that. We do procedural fluency because it's easy. And we have not developed a culture that it's expected that procedural and conceptual must go hand in hand. So we want to continue pushing the envelope where AI is concerned. Important research is taking place in the region. This is not a big research area for me, but Five Islands campus, Dr. Hunt, some colleagues from Trinidad, etc. Look them up. They are doing amazing work. And keep looking out for Advancing Caribbean Teachers in Math webinars, because we are having conversations, important conversations regionally about important topics in mathematics education.
Thank you very much. A lot to keep thinking about. So we go back to the persons in the room now before we come back to the persons online. You will have to come to the mic.
Thank you. My next question is, do you think that it is best to approach mathematical culture reform from the administrative, like policy making level, or do you believe that we need a more grassroots movement of persons who are passionate, competent, and committed to the very long journey that we have ahead in changing math culture?
I absolutely love that question. And it goes back to the lecture completely. I think we need both. I don't think it's an either or. We need policy to sustain practice, but often, remember I spoke about the fragmentation. We need the grassroots, we need the policy, we need that intermediate doing in that space. So for me, it's not an either or. One of the slides talked about a shared responsibility. And it goes exactly back to that. We have different roles in that particular movement. Our parents have certain roles, our principals have certain roles, etc. But the thing is to understand what those roles are. Once we understand the roles, we know what we are bringing. Each actor in a movie, we don't bring the same thing. We have our script, we know what we are bringing. So if we are saying to parents, we really want the grades 1 and 2s, we want you to reinforce certain things. I can do math. I am, you know, what we do in class. We say to the parents, this is your little script. You have conversations. This is where we want to go with them. That's grassroots. But you also need the higher level to support what is taking place, because we don't just want people doing whatever they want. We want, you know, something that is coherent, a coherent set of practices that we are all adopting, because it is not just in private schools, it's not just in government-assisted schools. We want certain practices to be embedded in our system. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We have one more question for our colleague online. If your proposed, and I think this is your challenge, if your proposed approach is accepted, could you attempt to predict how long it will take to see tangible results?
5 to 10 years minimum. And we have research coming out, I can't remember his name, that has been done on exactly this. In terms of, and one of the things I said in passing is that one of the hindrances to achieving this long-term, because this is a long game, this is not a sprint, this is not a 100-meter dash, is that our political cycles are 3 to 5 years. And there is often not a political will to do anything that long. And even when one administration has adopted X or Y, if there is a change, there could be a complete revamping, and then you start from scratch. So the easy answer, and I have the answer for that, is 5 to 10 years. And it's very difficult to keep momentum up for that length of time. That's why for some people, they think this issue is intractable, but I do not. I think I do not. I think if as a region, I'm not talking about just one jurisdiction, because this is a regional issue. At the CARICOM levels, we sit down and as governments, we say that this is going to be protected from political this or that, because there are some, and there's a framework I've developed, the 5 math master moves that we know that are essential for teaching mathematics. So if, for example, conceptual understanding and the use of concrete manipulatives, that should be outside of political interference. It should be what we do in every mathematics classroom. However, that's the exception to the rule. Most grade 1, 2 classes, our kids are sitting in rows and columns. I hear now the new trend is writing notes. It's easier. It's less messy. The kids make less noise and all of, but is it about us or is it about them? So this is a difficult discussion. And it is difficult all around for all of the reasons. Remember I said at the beginning, and I mentioned several times, that this is a complex issue and it's a systemic issue. But I think we are capable. We can sit, for example, with colleagues and leaders in math education, and CARICOM says to us, map out for us what is the portrait of what mathematics education must look like in our countries, every class, every school, etc. We don't have that at the moment. Everybody does what they want. And we typically focus on what is not working, like rote learning and procedural fluency and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's not important, but it must be that and, yeah.
Thanks for that, Lois. You know, I'm thinking about this conversation now as we think about the change. Yeah. And the question about what is the impetus that we need to realize the change. Because quite often, I think we come from the same choir, the same school, and the same church. Quite often, people like you and I, and those who think like us, who recognize that if it took 400 plus years to bring an end to the system called slavery, and we are still in a period of our development where we are trying to break down the repercussions, the psychic dramas and psychic traumas that we still carry from the result of being an enslaved society. We should not expect transformation and reform to happen overnight. You know, it's not a microwave kind of reality, and to try to do it that way is whiplash and it's insensible. But I'm sitting here from my previous role working in the region at CARICOM, because you invoke CARICOM. Yes, and I know you did that deliberately, right? But the point that I'm asking myself, because CARICOM operates on the framework of functional cooperation, which we know if you're paying attention right now is causing all sorts of new kinds of trauma for us within the region. At what point do we move from understanding absolute consensus, meaning all of us have to agree in order for us to move, to the point where we have a movement of the willing? Yeah? You talked about little bit at a time. I talk about ripple and infecting. Yeah? So at what point do we now come to a consensus that we do not need everybody, but a body of the willing? So I'll have you respond to that as your final remarks as we close up this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Bristol, for ending on this really important note. And I must commend my regional partners. And while I did not cite any of the work that I do in this lecture, this wasn't the point I pulled from my knowledge. We have an example of that with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Minister Curtis King, former Minister of Education, sitting in a body and saying to a group of people, we need some help in the region with mathematics. And that became the impetus for advancing Caribbean teachers in mathematics project. And Minister Curtis King started that with him and the team at Commonwealth. I salute my colleague, Dr. Moore, in Canada and others. And not only did he pull this as the willing for himself, we pulled other countries. So we are doing this in groups of three. So our first cycle was St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. Who can forget St. Lucia? Hi, Miss Giffard, one of my comrades in the field. And then we have moved on to Barbados. We are in Barbados now, currently, Dominica, and we are also in Grenada. So we are getting more people being interested, because Dr. Bradshaw sat in a meeting when she heard about ACT in math, and she said to Commonwealth of Learning, Barbados needs it. We are in the next cycle. So when you talk about the willing, when you talk about who is willing, because sometimes you leave those you have to drag teeth and nail. You don't have time for that. And this is a beautiful example of we started with those who were willing. And that first cycle, man, it surpassed my expectation as a mathematics education specialist, as a consultant, etc., because the work has continued beyond the funding, which is almost unheard of. Ms. Giffard, if she cares to give the account of St. Lucia, the district officers, they are still in contact with me. They did on an island-wide basis the CPA approach, which was one of the pillars of ACT in Math. So they decided that we were going to take it beyond the 25 people that we could reach into an island-wide movement, one curriculum officer, one principal, her district people, etc. That's the ripple effect we're talking about. That is what is possible. Whoever wants to lag behind, lag behind. But we're moving forward. The train is moving. So I do not think we have to wait for consensus. And for acting math, governments are hearing about it and saying, we are in the next cycle. We are in the next cycle. So if you don't want to be in the next cycle, we're not going to fight with you, but we're going to go with the willing. And we are seeing remarkable results. I don't want to, take up any more time giving anecdotal stories, but stories of real classrooms, real teachers who said, Dr. George, I thought this was impossible, but I said to them, be brave and try it. Don't knock anything until you try it. And we meet as a community of practice. I don't speak about things I don't practice. So I've talked about not one-off workshops, sustained. So we are together for 6 months. Have you ever heard of that as a professional thing? Not in the Caribbean. 6 months. We meet monthly. They are meeting in their smaller groups ongoingly, talking, etc. Because I believe, and I know the research supports it, that's how teachers change. Not by coming to a workshop for 2 hours, eating a few snacks, and then saying it was great. It is by embedding what you have learned into your practice and continuing the hard task of shaping and shaping until you become an expert. So that's the work we're about, Dr. Bristol. And with your experience from the curriculum level, we welcome you on board to pull in your colleagues willing, and I know you were able to get people who like to kick and scream. Dr. Bristol she knows how to get them on board. But we are saying, and I want to end on this positive note, what I said as my last 2 lines in the lecture. Our children deserve systems worthy of their potential, and we are capable of building them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. George. Thank you so much. I think we had a beautifully stimulating discussion and afternoon. It's a good way to spend a Wednesday afternoon I almost forgot today was Wednesday, after a very long day and tiring day. It's a good set of stimulation. Thank you to our colleagues online. We arrived at 32 participants online, so thank you very much. So to my friend in the corner, it was more than 6. Yeah? It's important to record these things. It was more than 6. Thank you so much to those of you who are in the room with us. I know these kinds of discussions at this time of day, at this time of the year is always a challenge because you're competing between having to teach. You're tired of being here for the whole day and you have to come back again. And so thank you so much for taking up the opportunity. Colleagues, we go forward together. Yeah, we don't go forward alone. And we recognize that we don't need to take a leap. We just need one step. One foot in front of the other, holding the hands of each other as we think about the practice. And I know Dr. George didn't spend too much time because I'm a practice architecture kind of personality. I think about practices all the time. We think about mathematical competency as a practice that operates within social spaces. How do you go forward in your space and foster and support new practices of mathematical competencies? This session was recorded. It will be cleaned up and turned into a YouTube, and it will be posted on the School of Education's website as a resource for teachers. And I will also be sharing it with Dr. George so that Dr. George will also have it available to her group of people as we continue to infect. Yeah, let's think about the viral loads in positive ways as we start new practices of competencies. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful afternoon.